Uncharted, the brand new movie starring Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg and a bunch of other people, including Antonio Banderas. Brent asking, will this contain spoilers? I'm going to try to keep this as light on spoilers as I possibly can. There's not a lot of parts of the movie that you haven't already seen scenes from. That said, I do believe this is an original story. It's not based on any one of the video games, so it's something that I could spoil if I wanted to, so I'm going to try to stay away from that. First things first though, I need to make a disclaimer so you know exactly where I'm coming from with this review. I've said this in the past on this channel. I am a big fan of movies where people solve clues and then those clues lead them to places where there are more clues to solve, which then lead them to more places. National Treasure, Sahara, The Da Vinci Code, all of those stupid ass movies, plus the good one, Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, great. I love them. I'm a big fan of them. Uncharted is one of those movies. I wasn't aware that this would be a movie where people solve clues that then take them to places where they can solve more clues. And I've played the first Uncharted game, so I should have known that that is exactly what I would be getting. And yet somehow that just flew over my head and I was pleasantly surprised because I cannot hate those movies. I love all of the National Treasures. I love all of the Da Vinci Code movies. I love Sahara. I love Indiana Jones. I cannot objectively rate those kinds of films because I just love the stupid silliness of them. And Uncharted is one of those films, so please take whatever I say with it with a grain of salt because I'm not really capable of being like completely objective with films in this genre. I guess the next thing to do with Uncharted would be to talk kind of broadly about the plot and how it functions. We start off with a scene that you see in the trailer. It's kind of one of the big action set pieces of the film. We're starting the film in the middle, technically, and then we do a little bit of a flashback and we find out some character stuff for a young Nathan Drake. He is about, 10 years old in this flashback, and he's got an older brother. And don't worry for the people who don't want spoilers, this is all very basic stuff. I'm not going to get into like the big twists and turns of the plot. Nathan's older brother, he's on a third strike. He's about to get arrested. So he runs away and is not seen from again. And then Nathan grows up into the Tom Holland beefcake that he is. And I say beefcake because there is a scene in this film where he's definitely just like working out his abs and showing off his abs. Like, they very much wanted to please the Tom Holland stans going into this film, or with this film, I should say. So then Nathan is approached by Mark Wahlberg's character, Sully. They have a bit of an issue, and that's what I'm going to talk about a bit later when I get into the cons of this movie. But they're able to reconcile and eventually go off on an adventure trying to get Magellan's gold. That gold has been lost for about 500 years, and they've got a key that can get them close to that goal. But you know what they need? A second key, naturally. And that's where Antonio Banderas comes in. His family is very much into finding treasure, hoarding wealth, being powerful. And Antonio Banderas thinks that if he can get Magellan's gold, he can be even more powerful. I believe he even thinks of it as a type of birthright. So that is how they eventually end up colliding into each other. Antonio Banderas, Tom Holland, and Mark Wahlberg just hanging out at an auction house, basically. And then from there, we sort of move off into the broader direction of the more narrow direction of the plot, which is to find Magellan's gold. The secondary characters of Chloe and Braddock are introduced, and those are essentially our 5 main characters for the duration of this film. And then we get into, I would say, the spoilers territory of the plot, so I'm not going to delve too much into it. Everything I just gave you was pretty much the setup of the film. But in short, they try to find Magellan's gold, and were they successful? I don't know. I guess you're just gonna have to go watch the movie to find out. But that's sort of the main narrative thrust of the film, and those are the main players in the film. So from a story standpoint, aside from Magellan's gold, you have these 5 characters all sort of intertwined, interweaved in different ways, and a lot of the thrust of the film comes from their interconnected relationships. And it all basically comes down to trust. That is a major theme of the film. Who can you trust? How far can you trust them? Are they the type of person who's going to betray you for a bag of gold? And that really underpins a lot of what happens in the first, I would say, 2/3 of the film. It's where a lot of the tension comes from. Can you trust this person? Can you not trust this person? And if you can get behind the different personalities at play and how they work with each other, then the will they or won't they betray each other vibe of it works for the most part. In the case of Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg, it's kind of like they're playing with us a little bit too much, because we know eventually that those two characters in the video games are buddies. That's not apparent in this first film because this is kind of like an origin story for their relationship. So you do get some of the like, will they or won't they betray each other, but it doesn't come off as being particularly strong because we know that eventually they do. For people who have never played the video games or have never heard or know anything about the video games, I suppose the will they or won't they could make the film a bit more exciting, could make it a bit more tension filled. But for myself, who has played the first game and who has, seen cinematic trailers and things like that for the other games, I pretty much knew that they were eventually going to be okay. So that felt a little out of place and not necessary in the film. Looks like we've got a bot coming in hot. Oh my goodness. They must be here for Tom Holland because they're certainly not here for me. Continuing on with some of the positives that I will give this film, there did seem to be some moments where the writing came off as a little bit clever and in a very subtle kind of way, which is something that you don't necessarily expect from a Hollywood blockbuster, right? You expect them to be very overt, very self-explanatory. There's not going to be a lot of like nuance to them, but there were a couple of things, and I can't unfortunately get into it too much because it does get into spoiler territory, but I can say, since I've already told you that this is all about Magellan's Gold, that there is something about Magellan's Gold that has to do with who actually traversed the world. Magellan is the explorer who famously, or perhaps not famously, depending on how much history you know, is one of the first, if not the first person to circumvent the entire globe, travel across the entire world by ship. And as the legend goes, at least according to the film, he had a bunch of gold with him. And something else that the film does illuminate is that it's not really Magellan's gold. It's just the gold that Magellan found, but he died soon after finding that gold. And it's actually the crew of the ship that circumnavigated the entire world without Magellan. It's just that Magellan gets all the credit because he was the person in charge up until the point when he died. And that particular narrative is actually mirrored by a couple of different characters in the film. And it kind of foreshadows something that happens later in the film. And so without going into spoilers, I will say I appreciated that little bit of foreshadowing and that they attempted to mirror those two stories and give the audience a little bit of a wink and a nudge before something happened, so that a kind of betrayal that happens in the film, and I won't say who. Remember, I'm saying there's 5 people in this film, and their intertwined relationships have a lot to do with the tension in this film. Someone is betrayed. I mean, there's lots of betrayals in the movie. It's basically a betrayal movie. But one of them is kind of telegraphed to us because of the Magellan information that we're given about that voyage. And I thought, all right, that's a bit better than I would expect out of a Hollywood film in terms of writing and attention to detail. So props to them. And I did want to mention it because I was a tiny bit impressed by that. Good for you, writers of Uncharted. I must now get into some cons for Uncharted because it certainly has some, and they need to be addressed. And the main one is that this film insults its audience, or at least it insults the intelligence of the audience. One of the major ways that it does so is that it treats a lot of things like magic. There are a number of sequences in this film that rely on the characters involved to be masters of pickpocketing, and also in one case, just kind of vanishing into thin air. And instead of the writers thinking of something better to do in order to move the plot forward, they just think to themselves, oh, obviously these people are capable of magic. In the case of pickpocketing, there's one extremely egregious example that I was kind of dumbfounded. I thought they were playing a joke on me for a split second. It takes place within about the first third of the film, so I'd say it's probably actually just at the end of Act 1. Basically, someone has something in a backpack, and someone else is able to just walk up to that person, stand about 3 feet to 4 feet from them, never really get close to them, and yet somehow is able to remove the item from that person's backpack. And I will reiterate this if I didn't say it before, which is not really reiteration, but that's not the point. The person is wearing the backpack, and they do not remove the backpack. The person who did the stealing had no opportunity to steal this. It is physically impossible for them to have done this, and yet the film treats pickpocketing like magic. And the person just steals it because the plot requires it. And I personally felt kind of insulted by that. Like, I couldn't imagine a broad audience watching a scene like that and thinking to themselves, oh yeah, no, that's how pickpocketing works. People can just reach into bags that are on people's backpacks when those two people are facing each other in a conversation and just take that person's stuff without the other person realizing it. Yeah, of course that makes sense. No, it goddamn doesn't. It's bullshit. Why would you ever do that? That really bugged me. Better video game movie, Uncharted or the original Mortal Kombat? I think Uncharted's probably one of the best video game movies that exists, honestly. I know it's a very low bar, but I think, yeah, Uncharted's probably one of the best video game movies that exists. Another instance where this film insults its audience is with the interactions between Nathan and Sully, especially at the beginning. The first interaction between them is largely okay. It contains some magic pickpocketing, but whatever, no big deal. I've already said my piece about that. But then we have a scene where Nathan basically tries to get something back from Sully, and they have a nice little conversation with each other, and it's very clear that Nathan doesn't trust Sully. And then all of a sudden, he does. And it doesn't take him long to come to the conclusion that he should go into business with Sully, and the whole interaction seems very forced. Like, no one would have that interaction with this person and then decide, you know what? I think I'm going to trust this guy. Doesn't work like that. And there's another interaction that's very similar later in the film where Sully and Nathan are not on the best of terms. In fact, you could say that their partnership at that point has ended. Minor spoiler warning, I apologize. And then, everything's just kind of fine because the plot requires it to be fine. Once again, they could have done a much better job of showing us how their relationship became repaired in that one instance, but they don't. It's just a very quick one and done, and everything's fine again. It's almost like how at the end of a Simpsons episode, everything that's happened in the Simpsons episode is just forgotten about. It's like how Bart has graduated from like grade 2 or grade 3 or grade 4, one of the grades, multiple times. It's almost like when we get to a certain point in the film and the film just needs to have these characters together, everything that happened previously is forgotten about and then we just move on from it. And it just feels cheap, and it feels like the writers are not respecting the audience, or at least me, in that way. Not a fan of that. I really need these big budget films to stop doing things like that. And I had a couple of nice things to say about the writers before this, but now I've got some not great things to say about it. And I guess the final little piece, which is a bit of a nitpick, but it also plays into the pickpocketing, is magic. There's another instance in the film where Chloe finds herself in a bit of a tough jam, and she should not have been able to escape. She just should not have been able to do it. And yet, she did. Bugged the hell out of me. Couldn't understand it. And if you see the film, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And I know that this is just down to the film needing to get her out of that situation, because she has to be in order for certain things to happen later. But do a better job next time. I wish I could give a better criticism of it than that, but I don't even know how they would have fixed it, and that's kind of the problem. I have a feeling that the writers wrote themselves into a corner with that particular sequence and couldn't do much else other than have her just disappear, even though she should not have been able to. But the film needed her to, so she did. The next and sort of final con I'll talk about in terms of the film is the ending sequence. And the ending sequence is kind of broken up into two parts. There's a fist fight section, and then there's a big spectacle kind of section. And I will give credit where credit is due. The spectacle part of this section showed me something that I have never seen before, and for that, I am grateful to this film. I'm not going to tell you what it is. If it's in the trailers, I have no idea, but I think everyone should experience what happens in this sequence for themselves. It looks pretty cool. The issue, though, is that the filmmakers, the editors, the writers were not able to build properly to the big final climax of the film. And this largely has to do with that final ending sequence being broken up into a fight section and the spectacle section. It's typical Hollywood, fast-cutting, shaky cam type stuff. And you understand what fight is happening, who's fighting in what sections, but I also got the feeling that there were definite parts of the film that were being left out. Not parts of the film, but like sections of the fight were being left out in order to make it a bit tighter and a bit more economical. But at the same time, I was also just like, oh, that's kind of a weird place for them to suddenly be. It happened once or twice during the fight sequence. But because it is that type of fight sequence, it's very quick in the editing. It's very much like bang, 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 bang. And when you get to the larger spectacle aspect of the finale, everything kind of like slows down, but it's not able to regain its momentum to lead towards that big final climax. So after the fist fight section, I kind of felt a little, not out of breath, but I felt like the film had kind of shot its load, for lack of a better term. It's a terrible term. I don't know why I used it, but I'm going to. I was saying climax, so of course it makes a lot of sense. Everything is about sex. Everything. So then when we get into this final big spectacle sequence, I think for myself as an audience member, I was kind of just tired a little bit, and then the film did nothing to rev it back up. It's almost like they were relying too much on what was on the frame and didn't think that they needed to build back up for the last very final moment of what was the climax of the film, which is a bit unfortunate because, like I said, that final spectacle aspect really showed me something I had never seen before, and I kind of wanted it to be given the same kind of buildup that we got leading into the kind of fist fight sequence and then that eventually coming to its conclusion. And I know that may sound like a bit of a nitpicky type thing, but I'm a strong believer that the ending of a film can really dictate how you feel about a film. I was a little bit let down by just that little bit at the end, and unfortunately I had to walk away from the film feeling a little bit disappointed. However, I think it needs to be said that even with the moments of the writers not respecting the audience, or at least respecting their intelligence, and the kind of minor letdown that I felt from the ending, overall, I'm pretty okay with Uncharted. And that's a good thing, because you can definitely tell by the very end of this movie that they're making more of them. There is so much setup here for future films, it's kind of insane. And all of that setup has to do with post-credit scenes. There are 2 that I saw, and potentially there could be a third. I don't know if there is because I didn't stick around. I didn't think about it because I thought that I got all of the post-credit scenes already. But they essentially, what they do is that when the film is over, they then show you the title card of the film. So you don't get anything at the beginning of the film just starts. You get the Uncharted title card at the end, and then you get one post-credit sequence, which is not even really a post-credit sequence because none of the credits have gone up yet, but it's a post-film sequence, I guess. And then you get another post-credit sequence, which may or may not be like a film version of one of the beginnings of one of the video games. It kind of seemed like it was, or at least it was sort of like a film version of one of the video game's cutscenes. Once again, I've only played the first one, so I don't know for sure, but it felt like it was trying to appease the diehards, like real hard. And then the actual credits kick in. I don't know if there's a third one. There could be. There potentially could be. Maybe it has like Venom or something at the very end of it. Who knows? Maybe we're just going to get like a Sony cinematic universe and that's how it's all going to tie together. Of course, that's not going to happen, but you definitely can tell that there's going to be another one of these movies. And it's almost to the point with the way that they set it up that they don't care about the box office for this film. I think Sony has just decided that Uncharted is one of their franchises and they're going to make it, despite what the audiences want. And honestly, I'm okay with that because I love these types of movies, specifically the Da Vinci Codes, the National Treasures. I love those types of movies, and this is one of those types of movies. I just want them to respect the audience a little bit more next time out. All right, so now that I've basically come to the end there, do you think I should do like that part where I look into the camera and tell people to subscribe to the channel?